Well, a wonderful day for an exorcism of this evil book. Ugh. Well, hello there, it's me suited in black, and I'm back from the dead after not posting a single video for weeks. And my previous video was anything but positive. But we're here today to talk about one of the most infamous books that created one of the most infamous movies ever, and that's of course The Exorcist. The Exorcist was written by William Peter Blatty, and it follows the story of Chris and Regan MacNeil as they have a demon possess the latter character, and it shows the confusion and crumbling of the MacNeil family. And once Chris feels like this condition that her daughter is in cannot be treated with medicine, she turns to the help of a priest, as she believes that this is a demon inside Regan's body and it has to be exorcised. Thus, they call The Exorcist. And as you'd probably expect, if you're a big horror fan, The Exorcist was turned into, the very famous movie that was incredibly infamous for its time of how its depiction of demonic possession could be so visceral and so, terrible. It remains an iconic depiction of demonic possession and an iconic staple of the horror genre. And do you think I came out of this book unscathed, right? Well, nope, not at all. Holy shit. This book just absolutely sent me on a huge anxiety-ridden roller coaster. It was like non-stop tension and anxiety for what was happening in this novel. It really, really put me on edge and scared me, and I really liked it because you know how much of a sucker I am for horror and thriller. And now, let's talk about this book. So one of the good things about this book is its use of tension. Every single scene really puts you on edge of what's actually happening, and it makes you really scared of how this demon is going to affect Regan and how it affects every single character around the MacNeils. It felt like every scene had a lot of weight to it and that there was a huge sense of gravitas, which made it ultimately really satisfying to read because you felt like you were on a huge, really horrible journey. Not as in like horrible as in it was a bad story, because this was a good story, but as in like the scenes that happened really scared you. And speaking of scares, there were a lot of scares in this book. There were many scary moments. The first one just simply being, how Regan is in bed and then suddenly her bed starts to shake, like, mysteriously, like you don't know what's actually happening. And that's already one of the first kind of scares of this novel. And it gets increasingly bad as they try to really heighten her medication of trying to control whatever's going on with Reagan. But it proves to be just far too strong, the demonic presence within her, that it can't be controlled by medicine. It has to be, someone religious has to, stop it. And this ties directly into the next praise of this book, is its exploration of religion and devilry. I thought was actually handled really well because it showed this kind of classic good versus evil of how the priests are trying to destroy or get rid of just this evil presence. And I thought it was just done in a very classic way, but through its use of all these strange behaviors that Reagan starts to exhibit really shows this really scary side of devilry and how insidious it is. One of the things I actually really liked in this book was the confusion every single character has for what's going on. Even Reagan herself doesn't understand what's actually happening. And everyone is trying to simply say it's just some sort of, what's it called? It's just a medical condition. It is nothing like demonic possession. You have to see a psychologist. You have to understand what's going on in Reagan's mind. But Chris is clearly, shocked and disturbed of what's happening. That, she believes, yes, this is some sort of evil presence. It can't be anything psychological or anything emotional. This is something far worse. And speaking of the characters, I thought the characterizations of most of the characters were actually quite good, especially Chris and Reagan, because you could actually really get to sympathize with Chris's, emotional trauma of what's happening to her daughter, and Reagan's, I'm gonna say not just Reagan, the actual person, but also the Reagan demon. I actually thought was handled really well. It really made the book immersive in that way that you could really get inside, or get inside. You could, be in Chris's shoes, and you can probably just be as, shocked and try your best to see what's actually happening to my daughter. So it really had a good way of immersing you in the story. I thought the priest Karas was quite good. He was quite sort of. I didn't expect him to be quite the sort of burly type, but he was also very sensible as you'd probably expect. And most of the side characters were also quite good, like the detective and all the servants of this house. I thought they were handled quite well. Not my favorites, but I think they were passable for me. And finally, I feel like, as I said in some of my other videos, I feel like the prose in The Exorcist is actually not that bad. It's actually quite approachable. You can read it, it's quite easy, and it's really easy to grasp what's happening, and the sort of scare factor of this novel actually really is helped by how easy the prose is. So overall, there were many positives in this book that really made me like it and enjoy this experience, no matter how scary it was. But it's now time to address some nitpicks I have of this novel. So whilst I feel that most of this novel was very good, I don't have any criticisms of this book. I'd have to reread it to maybe find some criticisms, but as I read it, I feel like I had some nitpicks about what I was reading. And one of these nitpicks was actually use of language, and that relates to the show versus tell thing. I feel like this book did a lot of showing, but did some telling that I wasn't really a big fan of. There was one moment I remember that actually just said this, the prose, not the characters, that actually said this scene was scary, or it was so evil. And I just thought that kind of just takes me out a little bit, because it doesn't allow me to interpret the descriptions, the language, and the storytelling. It just kind of felt a bit like a blatant kind of, you're supposed to feel this, you're supposed to feel that. This is evil, but it's not really up for you to decide. And I feel like, yeah, I don't really like that much. So that's more of just of a nitpick, because it doesn't happen that much. But that's just the only thing I have about the prose. And finally, the last nitpick is actually the pace of the novel. It's because there are some chapters I feel like that went on forever. Whilst how the sequence of events I think were fine, it's just that some chapters, like some of them are like a nice size, like 20 pages, then some were like 5 pages, and then some were like 100 pages. And I feel like that 100-page chapters, except for the climax, because I don't mind the climax being long, but I feel like some of the other chapters being incredibly long, I don't understand why it was done that way. It didn't really add that much for me. So that's why I kind of mean that the pace was a little bit weird sometimes, and that's mostly just a nitpick. It didn't really present as an actual flaw for me. But those are the only really nitpicks I have for this novel, because the rest is pretty good. I actually really liked this novel, as I said before. So my final consensus of The Exorcist is that thanks to its great use of atmosphere, use of themes, and use of immersive characters, this novel is very scary, and it will really be, difficult to read in that, scare factor, and I really recommend it to many horror lovers. Or to see how the film began, or where it came from. And so my rating for this game is a suited good plus, because I thought this book was very solid. I really enjoyed it, and it really delivered that scare I love in horror, because it's a bit of a duh thing to say a horror novel was scary, but this book was really powerful. Not quite as powerful as other novels or other personal favorites, but it's still really solid. And as I said, I really recommend it if you love horror. So thank you very much for watching my review of The Exorcist. So Thankfully, I had a nice positive review for a change, and expect another positive review for the book The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, because that was also a really good book as well. So, until we meet again, I'll be waiting.